Section 2 of the Octad, 8 Minutes of Journaling, read by Ryan Lee Mays. Very little is needed to make a happy life. It's all within yourself, in your way of thinking. Marcus Aurelius. Imagine being forced to take a job that you never wanted. Imagine this job entailed becoming the world's most powerful, wealthiest, and influential person. Imagine that you've been given the task of ruling a group of people who have been through some of the worst leaders in history, and they're looking to you to be the man of the people they want. Then imagine you're saddled with a continually unfaithful spouse, the death of several children, famine, disease, a disease that ravages the entire land, and war after war after war. Would you not have a word or two to speak on the matter? This was the life of Rome's last great emperor, Marcus Aurelius. Emperor Aurelius was a true Stoic, and he would have much rather lived his life as a philosopher than a ruler. But he was thrust into the position and was determined to make the best of it. Marcus was a follower of the great Stoics, particularly Epictetus, and understood that the vicissitudes of life would come, but how one sees them and reacts to them determines the outcome of happiness or sorrow. Aurelius certainly dealt with his fair share of sorrow, as he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. However, Marcus did not face these challenges unprepared. He possessed a weapon that proved true time after time, the power of writing. Previous emperors from Caligula to Nero allowed their position to overtake them with power and lust, and ultimately leading to their demise. Yet Aurelius, with the same position and access to the same opportunities for overindulgence, was able to keep a sober mind and a contrite heart by following the tenets of Stoicism and turning his time towards his personal journaling. The book Meditations is a collection of Aurelius' writings to himself and was never meant to be seen by the public eye. Thankfully, upon his passing, these writings were collected and distributed. His thoughts, in no small way, have helped shape the minds and ideals of some of the world's most prominent CEOs, entrepreneurs, educators, coaches, psychologists, and politicians. Simply put, Meditations is a masterpiece. It provides advice on everything from copying with unexchangeable ideas to dealing with death head-on. His writings teach the reader how to live, love, and conquer. The desire to sleep the day away, and, when important, when work needs to be done the most. To imagine, none of Aurelius' writings would have existed had he not decided to write a journal. Over the next 8 days, you will journal for 8 minutes a day as you begin a meaningful conversation with yourself. Journaling is important as it has become a lost art in Western culture. We scribe all our deepest thoughts and feelings in emails and text messages, but never take the time to collect them for future consideration or the enrichment of a new generation. Aurelius would have spent many nights writing his words and ideas down to revisit them as reminders of how to conduct himself within the highest position in the land. Ideas and experiences are far more easily recalled when preserved and re-examined within new contexts and time frames. For instance, I may have journaled about how I had dealt with a challenging situation only to revisit my writings years later and find new insight or reuse the same strategies to address a new circumstance. I have withdrawn not only from men, but from affairs, especially my own affairs. I am working for latter generations, writing down some ideas that may be of assistance to them. Seneca. There's a misconception that journaling is just writing. People see the act of putting pen to paper as a chore, reminiscent of your high school creative writing assignment. Journaling is much deeper than this. It gives us a voice to both your conscious mind and unconscious mind, that finds its way to the surface once it feels free to be heard. We often feel restricted by the fear of expressing ourselves outwardly and with good reason. Renowned psychiatrist Carl Gustav Jung named our sometimes darker inner ideas and feelings as shadow thoughts. These thoughts find comfort in the mind's subconscious and rarely enter the light of day. Ignoring these thoughts is not always a good thing. There must be an outlet to cope with the battles we find warring in ourselves. Jung would journal with great intention. His famous Red Book, Libre Novus, served as a conversation with his own soul as he searched for a greater understanding of his inner self. The book was published posthumously, with some arguing that it was never meant to be published, while others felt it was always his intention for the world to see his thoughts. Amongst the pages of analysis were his thoughts and his dreams. his understandings of myths, and the different roles within the human psyche. He adorned the pages of his book with beautiful and elaborate drawings. This was Jung wrestling with himself through the written word. This is what journaling is at its very core, a place to speak with yourself. Aurelius used his journal to remind himself of the principles he used to guide his life, while Jung used his writing to wrestle with thoughts and ideas that perplexed him. Both men spoke with themselves, and in doing so reached a deep level of insight into who they were. Getting started. It can be daunting to sit down in front of a journal full of blank pages and muster inspiration to write. Where do I start? What do I write? What if it's unintelligible or doesn't seem important enough? All of these are valid questions, but here's another. What if you do not write? What if you forsake the opportunity to speak with yourself and you leave the ability to find a deeper understanding of who you are in the ink of the pen rather than the words on the page? It is a missed opportunity. Do not be afraid of confronting who you are, and most certainly do not fear the lack of eloquence in your words. Pain, success, failure, and triumph are rarely spoken in the most elegant terms, but rather are fragmented moments of human experience. In other words, your journal doesn't care that you misspelled there or that you skipped a comma or two. So where should you begin? In my opinion, the hardest part for a writer is jotting down that first cohesive thought. But remember, this is your journal, and cohesiveness can be thrown out the window. We will lay out several different ideas on how to get started that may spark your interpersonal conversation. But let's start with lunch. No, really. Start by writing about your lunch. Most of you probably want to jump in like Carl Jung and start wrestling with the darkest and most complex recesses of your mind, but this can be a process. Instead, what if you just wrote down what you had for lunch and talked about it? You may feel like there's not much to say about that microwave dinner you grabbed on the way out, but write about it. Was it too hot or cold? Or maybe today was the day you got it just right. Maybe you grabbed it for lunch because you didn't have time amidst the onslaught of work emails to grab something more substantial and homemade. You sat there in your cubicle, unmotivated, knowing that all you had to look forward to was a microwave heat-up. But what joy can that bring to your hectic day? Alright, psychology students, you can already see what's happening. It becomes less about lunch and more about your situation. You start to reflect on your stressful life and less than fulfilling job, and before you know it, you're wrestling with those shadow thoughts Jung spoke about. Once you put the pen to paper or begin to type in your online journal, you begin opening the door to self-reflection. You'll become more in tune with how you think and how you feel over time. Eventually, you'll be fully and comprehensively speaking with yourself. Another way to begin your journaling is to pick a particular time of note in your life and compose a letter to yourself. This may be a time of struggle or a time of fonder days, for instance. I can remember a time in my childhood when my father lost his job and we struggled to make it from one day to the next. I wrote a journal entry to explain to my younger self that the moment of struggle was temporary and that I would go on to find a wonderful career in education, find a wonderful wife and family, make a good living, and become a writer. These words would have eased the days of a younger heart full of worry for the next day. One might think these entries are useless now that those days are gone, but instead, they remind me of how far I've come in my life and how blessed I am in time. And this makes things easy. It makes things easy to realize that we shouldn't take them for granted. Perspective is important in this journey, and the more you can understand where you come from, the more self-aware you will be. For more of this book, please check out the Octad on Amazon.com, available in both digital forms and paperback. Thank you for listening to 60 Seconds of Stoicism.